American Nation, page 93. This is section 5, Seeking Religious Freedom. Setting the scene. The small sailing ship had been tossed by so many storms that leaks had sprung in the ship's hull. After 2 hard months at sea, the colonists on board were relieved to see the shores of New England. Still, there were no European colonies for hundreds of miles. Worse, it was already November of 1620, much too late for crops to be planted. One of the voyagers, William Bradford, vividly remembered the situation. Being thus past the vast ocean, they had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses or much less towns to repair to. And for the season it was winter, and they that know the winters of the country know them to be sharp and violent. Unquote. William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation. Despite many hardships, the newcomers made their new colony succeed. Unlike the Jamestown colonists or the Spanish, they sought neither gold nor silver nor great riches. What they wanted most was to practice their religion freely. Years later, the founders of Plymouth Plantation became known to history as the Pilgrims. Definition: Pilgrims. The founders of the Plymouth colony did not call themselves Pilgrims. However, William Bradford once wrote that they were pilgrims who lifted up their eyes to the heavens, their dearest country. A pilgrim is anyone who makes a long journey for religious reasons. Next section, European states and religion. It was not easy for people to practice religion freely in Europe during the 1500s. As you have read, after the Protestant Reformation, European Christians were divided into Protestants and Roman Catholics. This division led to fierce religious wars. In France, for example, Protestants and Catholics fought each other for nearly 40 For nearly 40 years. Thousands upon thousands of people were killed because of their religious beliefs. Most European rulers believed that they could not maintain order unless the state supported a particular religion. The chosen religion was known as the Established Church. Established Church. In England, for example, the Established Church was the Anglican Church, or Church of England. In the 1530s, Parliament passed laws making the English monarch the head of the Church of England. In England and other nations, people who did not follow the established religion were often persecuted. Persecution is the mistreatment or punishment of certain people because of their beliefs. Definition: persecution. Sometimes members of persecuted groups had to worship secretly. If they were discovered, they might be imprisoned or even executed by being burned at the stake. Section read, Separatists seek religious freedom. One religious group in England that faced persecution were the people we now call the Pilgrims. At that time they were known as Separatists. They were called that because, although they were Protestant, they wanted to separate from the Church of England. The English government bitterly opposed the Separatists, while William Bradford remembered what some Separatists suffered. Quote, they were hunted and persecuted on every side, for some were taken and clapped up in prison. Others had their houses beset and watched night and day, and the most were glad to flee and leave their houses. That, unquote, William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation. In the early 1600s, a group of separatists left England for Leyden, a city in the Netherlands. The Dutch allowed the newcomers to worship freely. The city was spelled Leyden, Leyden. Still, the Pilgrims missed their English way of life. They were also worried that their children were growing up more Dutch than English. New section, Blue, the Pilgrim colony at Plymouth. A group of separatists decided to return to England, along with some of the English people who were not separatists. They won a charter to set up a colony in Virginia. In September 1620, more than 100 men, women, and children set sail aboard a small ship called the Mayflower. And that's in italics, Mayflower. As you have read, the journey was long and difficult. At last, in November 1620, the Mayflower ship landed on the cold, bleak shore of Cape Cod in present-day Massachusetts. The passengers had planned to settle farther south along the Hudson River. But the difficult sea voyage exhausted them. The colonists decided to travel no further. They called their new settlement Plymouth, or Plymouth, Plimoth, or Plymouth, Plymouth, because the Mayflower had sailed from the port of Plymouth, England. Read the Mayflower Compact. Before going ashore, the Pilgrims realized that they would not be settling within the boundaries of Virginia. As a result, the terms of their charter would not apply to their new colony. In that case, who would govern them? The question was important because not all colonists on the Mayflower were Pilgrims. Some of these strangers, as the Pilgrims called them, said that they were not bound to obey the Pilgrims, for none had power to command them. In response, the Pilgrims joined together to write a framework for governing their colony. In November 11th, 1620, the 41 male passengers, both Pilgrims and non-Pilgrims, signed the Mayflower Compact. That's highlighted in blue, the Mayflower Compact. They pledged themselves to unite into a civil body politic or government. They agreed to make and abide by laws that ensured the general good of the colony. See the primary source on the preceding page. Okay, the Mayflower Compact established an important tradition. When the Pilgrims found themselves without a government, they banded themselves together to make laws. In time, they set up a government in which the adult male colonists elected a governor and council. Thus, like Virginia's Great Charter, the Mayflower Compact strengthened the English tradition of governing through elected representatives. Red. Tradition of religious freedom. The Pilgrims were the first of many English settlers who came to North America in order to worship as they pleased. Still, as you will read in the next chapter, that did not mean that religious freedom spread quickly through England's colonies. Many settlers who wished to worship as they pleased still believed that only their own religious beliefs should be observed. Most of the later English colonies set up their own established churches. Still, the Pilgrims' desire to worship freely set an important precedent. That's in blue, precedent, or example for others to follow in the future. Plymouth's leaders announced that any honest men may live with them, that will carry themselves peaceably and seek the common good. In time, the idea of religious freedom for all would become a cornerstone of American democracy. Early hardships. The Pilgrims built their settlement on the site of a Native American village that had been abandoned because of disease. The colonists even found baskets filled with corn they were able to eat. Red. First winter in Plymouth. However, the corn was not enough to get the Pilgrims through the first winter. The Pilgrims had failed to bring enough food with them, and it was too late in the season to plant new crops. The harsh season was so difficult to survive because the Pilgrims had not had enough time to build proper shelters. Most threw together crude houses of sod or clumps of earth. Some dug themselves into pits in the ground, covered by branches to protect themselves from the weather. Nearly half the settlers perished of starvation or disease. Among those who died that winter was the colony's first governor. William Bradford was chosen to take his place. Bradford's able leadership helped the colony survive. Re-elected many times, he would lead Plymouth for most of the next 36 years. Despite the great suffering of the starving time, the Pilgrims' religious faith remained strong. They believed that it was God's will for them to remain in Plymouth. What could now sustain them, wrote Bradford, but the Spirit of God and His grace? Help from Native Americans in the spring. Help from Native Americans, red headline. In the spring, the Pilgrims began to clear land and plant crops. They also received help from neighboring Native Americans. A Pemaquid Indian, Samoset, Samoset, had learned English from earlier explorers sailing along the coast. He introduced the Pilgrims to Massasoit, Massasoit, chief of the local Wampanoag Indians. The Wampanoag who helped the Pilgrims most was named Squanto. As a young man, Squanto had been captured by an English expedition led by John Smith. Squanto lived for a time in England, where he learned to speak the language. As a result, he could communicate easily with the Pilgrims. Squanto brought the Pilgrims seeds of native plants, corn, beans, and pumpkins, and showed them how to plant them. He also taught the settlers how to catch eels from nearby rivers. By treading water, he stirred up eels from the mud at the river bottom and then snatched them up with his hands. The grateful Pilgrims called Squanto a special instrument sent of God. In the fall, the Pilgrims had a very good harvest. Because they believed that God had given them this harvest, they set a day aside for giving thanks. In later years, the Pilgrims celebrated after each harvest season with the Day of Thanksgiving. Americans today celebrate Thanksgiving as a national holiday. Section 5 Assessment. Number 1. Identify. 1A. Explain the significance of A. William Bradford, B. Pilgrims, C. Mayflower Compact, D. Squanto, E. Thanksgiving. 2. Define A. Established church, B. Persecution, or C. Precedent. Precedent. Comprehension. Why did many religious groups in Europe face persecution? How did the Mayflower Compact resolve a conflict among the Plymouth settlers? Why? B. Why is this document important? 5. How did the Native Americans help the Pilgrims survive? 6. Exploring the main idea. Review the main idea statement at the beginning of this section. Then write a letter from one separatist in England to another explaining why you have decided to sail on the Mayflower. 7. Comparing. Write a list of 3 ways the founding of Plymouth was different from the founding of Jamestown.